In this video, we're going to take a look at something that the book does not cover. And most books that do cover it do not go into the detail that you really need to have an understanding of in the future. And that's the cascade part of cascading style sheets. The simple rules of precedence, or the cascade, are relatively easy to understand. You can see in this diagram on the left, you can see the cascade from the browser to external to embedded to inline to HTML attributes. The simple rule here is that given that you have the same declaration for the same element at each of these 6 different levels, which one gets applied to that? And you saw in a sample in one of the videos where we were using different classes, and I specifically showed you that one element could have that same styling from as many as 4 different selectors, 4 different rules. So if we look at a declaration, property and value, the same declaration for the same element at all these levels, the first one that gets applied would be the browser. Whatever the default is in the browser, that would apply. However, if the exact same declaration for the same selector is in an external style sheet, then that would override the browser. If the same thing is in an embedded style sheet, it would override the external style sheet, provided the link comes before the style element. The inline style would then override the embedded style, and an HTML attribute overrides the inline style. So this is the easy way, and probably some of that is confusing. So basically, if all 6 of these had the exact same rule, in other words, the same elements being styled with the exact same property, and they all have different values, ultimately the HTML attribute would win out. Cascading style sheets, an inheritance feature that we looked at in a previous video, creates the possibility that any tag on a page can potentially be affected by any tag surrounding it. In other words, if the paragraph tag has a declaration, a property and value pair, it's going to be inherited by, say, a strong tag. At times, these styles will collide. The same CSS property is defined in multiple declarations for the same element. The cascade is a CSS mechanism that governs how styles interact and which styles get applied or get precedence when there is a conflict. Remember, in the previous video, I used this slide showing you how this particular paragraph tag has a class of important as well as code, which means that any declarations in here would be applied. Any declaration in here would be applied because it is a paragraph tag with the important class. Anything in this rule would apply. And because of both of these being there, anything in this rule would apply. That's 4 different rules that could potentially be styling the exact same paragraph tag. If they were using the same properties, such as color, as I used in this example, if you remember when you saw this slide, which color is going to be applied? That's what this is all about. So the cascade is a set of rules for determining which style properties get applied to any particular element. Inherited styles accumulate. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, they all combine to form a hybrid style. But suppose you have a strong element that was nested inside of a paragraph element, which is nested inside of the body element. Well, if that's true, because of inheritance, the font family would be Verdana, Arial, Helvetica. Because of inheritance, it would be a dark gray in color. And because the strong tag is being styled itself, it would have a font size of 24 pixels. Now, the only thing that's being styled in the strong here is the font size. However, because of inheritance, it would be the same as if you had a strong tag that had these three declarations in it because of the inheritance from the body and the paragraph. The first rule is that the nearest ancestor wins. If a tag does not have a specific style applied to it or property, then in the case of any conflicts from inherited properties, the nearest ancestor would win. So if you had both body and paragraph elements and they have different fonts being applied to them through the cascading style sheets, the strong would inherit from the paragraph. So if the body was styling it with a font family of Arial, the P was styling it with a font family of Times New Roman, strong would be Times New Roman because the P is a closer ancestor than the body tag. Rule number 2, directly applied style wins. A style applied directly to a given tag becomes king of the CSS family tree. So if you had a link inside a paragraph whose text is red, it's still going to appear as blue, and it's getting that blue in the underline from the browser style sheet. But it would not turn red because of the paragraph being color red. It's going to be blue because in the browser style sheet there is a rule specifically for anchor tags, so it's being applied directly. As you've seen, you can have one tag with many styles. You saw that in the example with a paragraph tag. Based on the type of styles and where they come from, a browser may apply one or more of them at one time. So let's give an example of a tag that has both a tag selector associated with it and a class applied to it. In this case, anything that is being styled for H2s would be applied, as well as anything for the class lead headline. Those selectors would both be applied to that particular H2. The style name could appear more than once in a style sheet. So there could be a group selector that styles the lead headline, secondary headline, and news headline, and there could be a class style selector as well for the lead headline. Both rules define how any element with a class of lead headline looks. So it would get its styling both from the group selector as well as the class selector. If the tag has both a class and an ID, both of them would be applied. This would get styling from the divider if it had a style, from the ID banner, as well as the class of news. You could also have more than one style sheet that contains the same style name attached to a page. We've already had a homework or an assignment where you linked two different external style sheets. So that happens in the real world as well, and those style sheets could contain the same rule with the same declaration in it. There are also complex selectors targeting the same name. It's common when you start using descendant selectors, which you did in homework 12 as well. So if you look at this little snippet of code here, we have a divider that has an ID of main content, and inside of that divider we have a paragraph element that has a class of byline. Well, given that, all of these would apply to it. That is, they would all apply to the paragraph tag that's mentioned here. It has a class of byline. It is a paragraph tag with the class of byline. It is a paragraph with the class of byline that is a descendant from the pound main content. It is also a paragraph that's a descendant of the pound main content or the ID main content. Make it even worse, you could just add another simple paragraph rule here. That would make it 5 different things that would apply to this same paragraph tag. So if more than one style applies to a particular element, the web browser combines the properties of all those styles as long as they do not conflict with each other. And conflicting here would mean that they are styling the same property. So which one wins out? If multiple styles are inherited by a tag, have the same property set, then the most specific one wins. We talked about that earlier. After that, then you have to determine what the specificity is. And you do that on a point basis. A tag selector is worth only 1 point. A class selector is worth 10 points. An ID selector 100 points. An inline style 1,000 points. A pseudo element is the same as a tag selector, which is the example of first child here, still just 1 point. And a pseudo class, which we'll be looking at with the anchor tag here shortly, has a value of 10 points, the same as a class selector. Inherited properties do not have any specificity. So in this previous example then, if these all styled the font color and we had 4 different colors, which one would win out? So if we look at these individually, a paragraph tag, that's a descendant of the ID main content. You have an ID, 100 points, and a tag, 1 point. So this top one is worth 101 points. The second one has the same pound main content, ID, 100 points, the same tag, the paragraph tag, 101 points, and it also has a class, 111 points. In the third example, it's merely a tag and a class, which is 11 points. And the last one here is worth only 10 points because it's a class. So of all these, no matter what order they're put in, because they're all styled in the same paragraph tag, whatever color is defined in this one would be the color it's going to be, because it has more specificity based on the point system. This chart just shows different possible selectors and how you arrive at that total. For example, a paragraph tag has no IDs, no classes, 1 tag for 1 point. Dot byline, it's a class selector. No IDs, 1 class, 10 points, no tags, so it's a total of 10. The paragraph tag with the class of byline, 1 class, 1 tag, 11 points. So you can see how these actually all work together. In the case of this bottom one here, it's a little bit more complex. Pound wrapper, pound content, dot byline, a, hover, and we haven't talked about the pseudo classes for anchor tags yet, but this is a pseudo class, the colon hover, done similar to the pseudo elements that we looked at for text, such as the first line and the first letter. But this would read, first of all, let's take a look at how this reads. You're styling an anchor tag in the hover state. So any anchor tag in the hover state, again, we'll talk about that later, that's a descendant of the class byline, that is a descendant of the ID content, that is a descendant of the pound wrapper. Well, it has 2 IDs, pound wrapper, pound content, has 2 classes, dot byline and the hover, and it has 1 tag, the anchor tag. This is a total of 221 points. And I have a document out there on Blackboard along with this video and the PowerPoint that summarizes the points that you've seen here and shows the same grid as a sample. So what if it's a tie? What if 2 of them have the same value? Well, in that case, the last one wins. And these 2 examples, p.a.email. So this is an anchor tag with a class of email that's a descendant of a paragraph tag. That's 2 tags, the p and the a, 2 points, 1 class, 10 points, or a total of 12 points. And if that wins out, it'll be blue. And the second example, an anchor tag that's a descendant of a paragraph tag with the class of byline. Well, both of these are styling the anchor tag. In the second case, you have two tags, the P and the A, 2 points, and one class, the byline, 10 points. It would be red. But they both have the same point value. Well, that's where the last style wins comes from, and if this was the case, the color would be red because it comes after the one with the color of blue. Those examples were based on this HTML code that you see here. So it's very possible for these two to exist. Sometimes conflict is between a style in an external style sheet and an internal style sheet. Well, again, last style wins. Placement within the HTML file determines the winner. So if the external style sheet is linked and then below that you create an internal or embedded style sheet, the selector in the internal or embedded style sheet would win out over one that's in the external style sheets. If you did the internal or embedded style sheet first and then linked it to the external, then the whole thing would flip-flop. Again, the last one that appears in the code from top to bottom. Last style wins. You can also overrule specificity. You can insert an exclamation point important after any property to shield it from specificity overrides. So in this example here, the color red has the @important. Both of these selectors are styling the anchor tag. The top one has a value of 101 points, 100 for the ID, 1 point for the tag. The second one only has a value of 1 point. So normally the red would overwin, but because we added this important to it, this one's going to win. So it's going to be teal. Notice that there's just a space and then the exclamation point important, and this should end, then the semicolon would be after the important. Don't overuse this. There are times, like in a printed style sheet, that makes perfect sense, but do not overuse this. Please be careful about how you use that. You can also manage the specificity. So if you look at the example here, first of all, the HTML example is a divider with an ID, a sidebar, paragraph tag with a class of intro nested inside of that. Well, if we're looking at that paragraph tag and styling that, both of these selectors style that. It is a paragraph tag that's a descendant of the ID sidebar, and it's also a paragraph tag with the class of intro. Well, the second one has a value of 11 points, while the top one has a value of 101 points. So this is actually going to style that paragraph tag with a font of Verdana and a font size of 0.9 EM. The fact that this comes later has nothing to do with it because this has the higher point value. Now I could easily change this. Instead of adding classes or using the important, I could change that very simply by adding that class to the beginning of the p.intro. Now this has a value of 111, while this one only has a value of 101. So in this case, the font family will be Georgia, and the font size will be 1.25 EM. So I can actually manipulate the rule, the selector in the rule, to override a previous one. Selective overriding. You create an internal style sheet listing the style you want to override if the external or global style sheet is there as well. Or you could create more than one external style sheets. My rule of thumb is embedded or internal style sheets are only used in the case of a page where you need to change one or two styles just for that page, and it's not going to be used anywhere else. If it's going to be used in other places, I would create an external style sheet, name it appropriately to know that what it's doing, and then go from there. The last thing I want to mention in this video is that you can go out to the W3C, and anytime you want to validate your CSS to make sure that it's written properly, you can submit that to the site. Just go to this link. It'll walk you through it of how you want to do it. You could do it by URI, you could do it by a file upload, or directly input it. So there's different ways of doing it, but you can always validate your CSS to find where an issue might be. So that's the Cascade. Not an easy topic to digest. Again, it's not in the book, so I hope that you either listen to this video a couple times or at least go through the PowerPoints a couple times to fully understand the power of Cascade and how it could affect what your page looks like in the end.